Good morning. I hope you've all had a really good week, and I'm glad that we're back here together for a Godly Play story. Our story this morning is called The Great Family. And I wanted to tell you once again that if there's a favorite story that you would like to hear us tell, just let us know so we can do that. Are you ready to hear a story? Good. This is the Desert Box. Many wonderful and important things happen in the desert. So it's important for us to learn about it. But we can't bring the whole desert into this classroom. So we just bring in a part of it in this box. The desert is a dangerous place. It's always moving. The wind blows, and the sand blows and stings your skin. During the day, it's very, very hot. But at night, it gets really cold. So when you're in the desert, you have to wear many layers of clothing. People don't go out into the desert unless they really have to. There's hardly any water, so you get very thirsty. And not much can grow in the desert, so there's not much to eat either. After the flood, when the people went out into the four directions of the earth, often they would follow the path of rivers. The rivers would show them which way to go. And they would also give them water to drink for themselves and for their animals. And as the people followed the rivers, they would gather together and create cities or smaller towns. And one of the greatest, the biggest, and most ancient cities was called Ur. The people of Ur had many gods. They believed that there were gods for all different things. There was a god for the trees, and a god for the stones, and a god for the river, and a god for the land, and God for the air. There was a god for everything. But there was one family who believed that all of God was everywhere. Abraham, Abram, and Sarai were part of that family. When it came time for them to move somewhere else, they got all of their animals, their donkeys, and their sheep, and all of their helpers, and they walked along the great Euphrates River. It was a very long way. Abram and Sarai and their helpers, all of their animals, kept going. And when they began to see people coming out of the town of Haran, they knew that they were getting close. And finally, they were there. One night, Abram went out into the desert, and he looked up at all of the stars in the sky, and he looked out across the sand. And Abram came so close to God, and God came so close to Abram, that Abram knew what God wanted them to do. God wanted them to continue on to another place and find a new place to live. God told Abram that he would make him the father of a great family, and that he and Sarai would be blessed so that they could be a blessing to others. So Abram and Sarai did what God said and continued on their journey. And they came to a place, Abram came to a place called Shechem, and he went up on the hill there and prayed to God. And he knew that God, all of God, was in this place. So he built an altar to mark the spot. Then they continued on, Abram and Sarai. And they came to another place called Bethel. And again, Abram went up on a hill and prayed to God. And he knew that all of God was in this place too, that all of God was everywhere. So he built another altar to mark this spot. And they continued on their journey. And finally, they got to Hebron. One night, Abram went out into the desert and again came so close to God, and God came so close to him that Abram knew what God was saying. God told Abram that he and Sarai would be the parents of a great family. And Abram laughed. He thought that it would be impossible for God's promise to come true. But God told them to change their names, and Abram became Abraham, and Sarai became Sarah. One day, 3 strangers came to them from the desert. Abraham welcomed them into the tent. And Sarah took 3 scoops of flour and made bread and meat, and she gave them milk and water to drink, because that was their custom. And the strangers told Abraham that they were going to have a son. Sarah heard this, and she laughed, because they were very old. And then the strangers left. And you know what? They did have a son. And they laughed again. And they named him Laughter, which in their language was the word Isaac. Isaac grew up, and Sarah was very old and full of years. And she died and was buried there. Abraham was very sad and missed Sarah. But he knew he had one more thing that he needed to do. So he sent out one of his helpers all the way back to the land that they were from, to find in his family a wife for Isaac. And there, standing by a well, the helper found Rebekah. Rebekah was very kind and gave him water to drink and helped him to water all of his animals. And then she invited him to meet her family. And the helper told them all about Abraham and Isaac and how they were going to have a great family. And Rebekah wanted to be part of that family. So she went back, all the way back, with the helper. And as she got closer, Isaac saw her and ran out to her. Isaac and Rebekah were married. And soon Abraham was very tired and full of years, and he died also, and he was buried there with Sarah. Isaac and Rebekah had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, and this kept going all the way up until the time when your grandparents had your parents, and your parents had you. And all of us became part of that great family. And there were so many of us that we number as many as the stars in the sky and as many as the grains of sand in the desert, just like God promised. Now I wonder, what's your favorite part of this story? I wonder, what's the most important part of the story? I wonder where you are in this story, or what part of this story is about you. I wonder if there's anything that we could leave out of this story and still have enough. I wonder what you are going to do with the rest of your day.